Hi there. As U.S. President Donald Trump provokes a broad-spectrum trade war and dealt a heavy blow to globalization and the global governance system, Chinese President Xi Jinping stands with emerging markets and developing nations to promote trade cooperation and multilateralism. In the just concluded visits to the United Arab Emirates and 4 African countries, new impetus has been offered to China-Arab relations, China-Africa ties and BRICS members. This also compels China to take a more positive role internationally. So how does Xi's tour contribute to strengthening global multilateral cooperation? Why are more regions welcoming China's cooperative model? And what is China's new diplomatic philosophy in the context of the rise of unilateralism and protectionism? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Su Ge, who's the chairman of the China-Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, and Walter Ruigu, managing director of the CAMAL Group. We shall also speak to Ravish Bhatia, a Friedrich Bhatia Fellow at the George Mason University in New Delhi, and Pavel Fagenhor, a defense analyst in Russia via satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we start the discussion, let's take a look at this.
China views the United Arab Emirates as a strategic partner in its revived Silk Road initiative. As a trade gateway, 70% of China's exports to the Gulf, Africa and East Asia go through the UAE. Xi's visit brought China and the UAE's partnership to a new height, lifting ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership. President Xi said the two sides should build an all-round and all-dimensional energy cooperation mechanism, deepen investment and financial cooperation, and promote innovation together. He also urged the strengthening of security cooperation and fighting against all forms of terrorism. President Xi chose Africa as the destination for his first foreign visit, both after he was first elected Chinese president in 2013 and after his re-election this year. Senegal was the first African country on the Atlantic coast to sign up for the Belt and Road Initiative. Beijing promised to support the country in the areas of development, anti-terrorism, peacekeeping, and maintaining social stability. Rwanda President Paul Kagame is currently the rotating chairman of African Union. Xi's visit there was all about trade, investments, mutual cooperation, and making contributions to security in Africa. In South Africa, Xi attended the 10th BRICS Summit in Johannesburg, which opened up the second golden decade for BRICS cooperation. Xi called for building an open economy and for upholding multilateralism. This year, the BRICS Summit also invited other emerging market economies and African nations to participate in the BRICS Plus dialogue. Heads of state attending the talks defended free trade and the multilateral trading system. Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi said the visit opens new prospects for South-South cooperation and promotes the building of a community with a shared future for mankind.
Welcome to our discussion here, gentlemen. This 5-nation tour by President Xi Jinping of both Middle East and Africa has been brought to a successful conclusion, obviously. But since the founding of the PRC back in 1949, it seems the image and our relationship with Africa have both been kept very much alive on the radar of the Chinese government. I'd like to know, first of all, from Ambassador Su Ge, what is the purpose of this official visit by President Xi, and do you think he has achieved what the Chinese government wants to achieve?
Oh, definitely. The visit to 4 African countries plus United Arab Emirates by President Xi Jinping. This is the very first visit since he was re-elected as president of the Chinese Communist Party at the beginning of this year. So this has been a very significant visit. The significance can be felt at least in several aspects. Firstly, by visiting a selected country from the Middle East, it enhances China's cooperation in its initiative with the Belt and Road cooperation in that region. which would serve also as a pivotal point to link both the ends of the one side being the Europe, Africa, the other side being the Asia-Pacific region. And another aspect, you can see the visit has greatly enhanced China-African cooperation with a general direction towards cooperation towards the good cooperation for mankind in the future. And lastly, we can see that President Xi Jinping also attended the BRICS summit. And against the current international situation, which you observe protectionism, all the 5 leaders in the BRICS, they voiced a support for multilateralism, opposition to unilateralism. So that's a good sign for which would indicate that world community, especially the emerging markets and developing world, are for globalization.
Probably Ambassador Ruigu has deliberately reversed the pecking order by putting the most important point at the end of his analysis about the significance of President Xi's visit of these 5 countries. Now, do you think the successful and fruitful conclusion of this 5 nations
recognize that Africa is more than just a resource place? If you see the reason he visited Mauritius, for instance, Mauritius is a small island, but yet Mauritius they're going to be one of the first free trade agreements between China and an African country. And we're not talking about exports to China of products, we're talking about financial services, we're talking about insurance. So that is a reason to visit Mauritius. The reason to visit Rwanda also, Rwanda is not rich in resources, but Rwanda now, Paul Kagame has really revitalized his role as the leader of African Union, and that is one of the key reasons that Xi chose to visit that country.
Mauritius is small in size. Let me cross over to our Indian correspondent, Indian guest speaker, Mr. Ravish Bhatia, for his comment on the importance of Mauritius. Now, this small country, an island nation, is honored pearl of the Indian Ocean. Naturally, China's global stakes reach out to the shoreline of the Indian Ocean, including Mauritius. Despite the successful summit meetings between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping in Wuhan and Qingdao on the sidelines of the SCO, Mr. Bhatia, do you believe the Indians are still concerned with the global expansion of our stakes, geopolitical and business?
Thank you for having me on this show. It's always nice to be back. I definitely think there are concerns there. I think the concerns that embed from the Indian side is that China is encircling India, specifically around the ocean, by defining what we call the pearl, a ring of pearls. And hence, I think there's definitely that concern, those concerns there. There are terms used to describe China's foreign policy in the Indian circles, and they are often called a debt trap diplomacy, especially in what happens in Sri Lanka. So I think there's definitely some level of mistrust in every engagement or move that China makes on the Indian side. And in order to remove those issues that exist, it's important for both sides to work together.
Well, let me cross over to Pavel Fagenhor, our Russian guest speaker. Now, India and Pakistan, Pavel, India and Pakistan have been recruited by the SCO as new members. Do you think this major diplomatic move helps to dispel suspicions on the Indian side of China's global business stakes?
Of course it will most likely help, but from the Russian point of view, actually, Russia believes that all the Asian countries should be together, kind of forming some kind of sort of a bloc against the United States, maybe, and the West, and especially the United States. So from Russian point of view, a long time kind of strategic point of view, the more Asian countries in, the better. Will that actually help in Chinese-Indian relations? Maybe to some extent, yes, but that's, again, not for most likely Moscow to decide. Moscow has, of course, excellent relations with Beijing and excellent relations with New Delhi, and would try to have these kind of this Asian triangular more effective, and try and help China and India put down their long-standing feuds. Because then from Moscow point of view, that's not the most important thing to do.
Pavel, maybe we are barking at the wrong tree. After all, the SCO or Indian Ocean are just two of the options in China's charm campaign and proactive diplomatic campaign. China stands for win-win and co-prosperity in the much broader context of South-South cooperation to rebalance the US-led world order, which is allegedly outdated because it ignores some of the key and critical stakes of the emerging markets. Look at the importance and growing importance of G20 in the wake of the financial meltdown in 2008. What do you think of the agenda of both Moscow and Beijing? This has drawn a lot of fire from the West.
Russia, of course, has been supportive, and there at the BRICS summit too, speaking the right words against unilateralism, for multinationalism kind of in international affairs. That has been the long time Russian goal. On the specifics of actually economic protectionism, it's a bit more checkered kind of outlook, because, well, the American present protectionist drive is not so much about Russia at all. Russian-American trade is small. Russian interests have been also affected, but to a much larger extent it's been affected by sanctions which are political in nature and not economic at all. And basically, ideologically, I would say that the Russian leadership and President Putin is closer to Trump in many respects. Putin has also been kind of traditionally, intuitively maybe, a kind of economic protectionist and economic nationalist. Though politically, of course, they are apart, but there's a kind of some ideological closeness. So that's what means Russian position is, well, it's a bit ambiguous. In the trade disputes, Russia takes a back seat because it's not that much involved. It trades in commodities mostly. And on the political side, it's very much involved. But the BRICS meeting was not that much about politics at all.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Su Ge, head of the European Union has just concluded the latest round of negotiations with President Trump over the alleged trade standoff, particularly on the issue of steel and aluminum. Now, it seems both sides are ready to or close to inking an agreement about averting a trade war by adopting zero tariff for both sides. However, French government would say no, in most probability, in areas of agricultural produce. So, what do you think of the alleged plan for the Chinese authorities to get united with the African Union, BRICS bloc, as well as emerging markets to balance the trade protectionism, and European Union might be also a partner of expediency for the same purpose?
That's a very good question. I think that when we look at this world, we see both the political multipolarity, decentralization, and democratization of global landscape. And on the other hand, we also see economic globalization. Globalization, we need to look at it with a very inclusive approach. Globalization has been a force. Finally, it has generated a platform in which globalization, the forces have liberated productivity. forces for production. You can see that immense wealth we are enjoying today. And we are thankful to globalization. That being said, my point is that all nations, no matter where they are, we are all parts of a globalized production, among the production chain or value chain. So if we can, everybody, of course, you have your national interests. We need to find a common denominator of national interests. If somebody only put his own national interests above everybody else, and then work out policies just like that, that is going to hurt, upset the world existing economic order. So I would say that globalization is the way to go. As the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said, no matter what the United States and Europe have reached upon, it's up to them. But finally, we hope that the forces of globalization will be non-stoppable.
The alleged conspiracy of taking resources from African countries has always been used as live ammunition against China's growing presence and business stakes in African continent. Therefore, Walter, what do you think of the far-reaching goal and blueprint of the Chinese government to assist with the massive industrialization in Africa? It has nothing to do with the resources themselves. It does have a lot to do with, for example, the 10-point proposal that President Xi raised 3 years ago in Johannesburg at the summit meeting with the heads of African states.
Yes, I think the first thing, if you really want to understand China-Africa relations, you need to understand China first. Because what happens within
That's
the
a big
domestic
question, I'm afraid.
because what happens within the domestic market affects China-Africa relations. China's economy is moving from one that is focused on investment to one that is focused on domestic consumption. So whereas 10 years, 20 years ago, China's economy was highly, highly dependent on resources, the economy is shifting. So as the domestic economy shifts, so does the China-Africa relation shift. And like I mentioned in the opening statement, this visit by President Xi Jinping visited 3 countries that, they're not resource-rich countries. And one of the reasons to visit South Africa is not necessarily for their resources, although they're a resource-rich country, is because most of Chinese stock investment is in South Africa. And also there is the BRICS conference. So this visit, like I said, is good because it dispels the myth that China is only in Africa for resources. One of the key things driving China now is that the domestic market is also saturated. So China is in quest for new markets, and Africa presents one of those potential markets. So this visit is good because, like, I believe China has 3 main interests in Africa. The first is support in the international community, whether that be in United Nations organizations or whether it be in other multilateral agencies. The second is quest for markets. Although the domestic market is not enough for most companies, particularly private companies. And of course the third is that yes, Africa does have resources that China needs. So it's a 3-pronged approach. And as the Chinese domestic economy changes, so does the China-Africa relationship.
But do you buy this idea, Walter, that China is expanding its overcapacity, is exporting its overcapacity and building up debts in the host countries in South Asia and some parts of Africa? This has been a popular assumption in the Western media, which criticizes the essence of China's Belt and Road Initiative.
This is what I would say. Let's look at construction. There are over 100,000 Chinese construction companies domestically. As the Chinese economy has slowed, if you remember, in 2008, the Chinese economy was growing at double digits, almost 14%. Right now, the Chinese economy is growing at 6%. There's 100,000 construction companies. They need to build. What
because
are they going to do?
The construction boom is over.
Yes, the construction
land
boom
revenue is over.
Yes. So now these companies need to move overseas. At the same time, there's an infrastructure deficit, not only in Africa, but many other nations. So there could be the possibility of a win-win. So rather than just look at it from a global perspective, you need to look at it from a project-by-project cases. It's not even enough to look at it from a country-to-country basis. You need to look at the specific project, you need to look at the specific project terms, because that is how you'll understand whether or not the deal is fair for both countries.
Thank you very much. Ravish, are you still with us? What do you think of this idea of infrastructure? Many Indian friends say to me, look, China could play a leading role in making investment, constructing infrastructure in India, without which India would not have the luxury of a quick economic takeoff. What do you think of this allegation?
I think more than an allegation, it's an analysis, and to a certain degree I agree with it. I also agree with the fact what's been mentioned here right now is that in the last 10-15 years, Chinese companies, especially construction companies, have built the innate capacity to deliver on construction projects like no other country in the world at present. And to a great extent, these Chinese companies are very well equipped to deliver on projects. The challenge is in negotiating the terms of these projects, which to a great extent is a business decision when it comes to India at least. Because there are multiple other players, especially countries like Japan and some European players that are also involved in this game. So at least within the case of India, there are a lot of Chinese companies that bid for projects, and many of them actually get those projects. But the main point of discussion here remains on negotiating the terms of agreement of those projects. And I think the consensus here is also that some of the Chinese engineers and manpower is actually better trained than some of the local players, but that just turns out to be a political decision which both sides need to talk about, discuss, and negotiate better.
Not only has our exchange rate with the US dollar declined, but also there's the ongoing debate among the general public in China, Ravish, that our forex reserves are being drained because of the shrinking exports to the United States and the trade standoff between the two biggest economies. And therefore, we don't have as much liquidity and forex as we did in building or translating the Belt and Road Initiative into realities in these host countries. What do you think of these concerns, Ravish?
There are difficult concerns here. And one of the key reasons is that China still holds a much larger forex balance compared to many other countries in the world. So when somebody like me looks at it from South Asia, relatively to us it looks like China has much bigger forex reserves than any of the other countries. However, I think those reserves would be better directed at increasing the productive capabilities domestically within China, focusing on innovation, research, and technology. And it also gives China a lot of strength in the international political order, because it can take decisions which many other countries like India, which might have the connections and the relationship with the rest of the world, but cannot make those extremely strong decisions because it does not have that strong base of forex reserves within its domestic ecosystem.
Thank you so much. Pavel.
So, but this is an internal decision.
Excuse me, Pavel, what do you think of China's financial muscles in helping emerging markets so that we can get united in rebalancing the American assertiveness, namely to put America first, absolutely, and unconditionally?
It's of course important and very important to do something with what right now Trump is pushing through. His rather crude politics of high pressure to get concessions puts many people, many nations into harm's way, and it would be quite normal and productive for them to work together instead of trying to, each on their own, try to deal with the United States and with its right now bullying, I would say, tactics in international trade. And of course, it's very important for Russia too. Russia has right now actually a very big problem with reconstruction in Syria. To say it needs a lot of international help there, and actually could see other countries like China join in, because that's very important to stabilize the Middle East. So there's a lot to talk about and a lot to work about right now.
Pavel, do you think it's one of the major issues on the agenda between and among members of BRICS bloc that the American pullout from Iran nuclear deal will seriously affect our relationship, business relationship with Tehran, one way or another? India is no exception. Russia, of course, will fall victim to this policy of the Trump administration. What do you think of, for example, the idea of phasing out our reliance, an excessive reliance on US dollars? Because the US would leverage its financial resources in punishing whatever companies that do business with Iran. So the prospects of RMB as a major reserve currency will be on the table as one of the viable options for BRICS members. Pavel?
Well, yes, that's been a long time idea in Moscow, that dependence on the mighty dollar should be reduced. Actually, in a couple of years, Russia has very much scaled down its investment into American treasuries, buying instead German treasuries and other kinds of hard currency reserves, and kind of scaling out of the dollar. Though actually speaking, in Johannesburg, President Vladimir Putin said, well, yes, we should kind of reduce the role of the dollar, but we know that the dollar is still very important. And with the Iranian right now issue coming up, for Russia, again, it's not that much, because Russia does not really have that much trade with Iran. If we're buying Iranian oil, it's not to import it into Russia because we don't need it. It's to maybe resell it somewhere else, whereas China and India are buying Iranian oil and actually using it. And for them, that's the American financial sanctions for dealing with Iran, and America wants to stop absolutely the export, or almost stop the export of Iranian oil. That's a big issue. Russia would most likely agree, yes, that there should be the Chinese yuan should be used more as an international currency. Russia is very much for that, and there have been agreements on bilateral trade between Moscow and Beijing that it should be not in dollars.
Remarks about the future of RMB and attitudes of the Russian federal government. Thank you so much, Mr. Suga, Mr. Walter Ruigu, Ravish, and Pavel Falkenhor. Have a nice weekend. Thank you so much.
This